Thank you very much, Carl, for that very generous introduction. Yeah, so g'day, I'm Cameron. I'm a lecturer in game development here at Macquarie, as Carl said, and I have a lot of feelings about generative AI, but of course being an academic and working in STEM, feelings is not really enough. So I also have a lot of arguments and hopefully some interesting evidence to talk about with you. From how I've been approaching AI and how I've been thinking about AI over the last few years, but also kind of beyond that. I remember when GPT was just GPT 2.5. It was just a funky little guy that wasn't giving us existential fear as much as it has. So anyway, we're going to get into that. What I want to start with though is this is a little bit of a provocation for the workshops that I'll be running later, which I hope to see many of you at. And this is where I want you to start thinking about this as we talk. And many of you might have already thought about these things. But what I want you to think about is what parts of your practice are you replacing with AI? When you're in the workplace, when you're doing your research, when you're doing your teaching prep, your admin work, anything like that, what parts of your work are you integrating AI with? Maybe I should say integrating instead of replacing. And then I want you to think about, are those the same ones you're allowing your students to use AI for? So if you're a programming lecturer, are you using Copilot or another generative AI tool to write your, countless boilerplate for loops for you? And if you are, and you're not letting your students do that, why? What's your reasoning behind that? So I want you to kind of think about these things as I talk, and then we can hopefully share some of this in the workshops. Okay, so a few of you here, I think probably Fran's the one who's seen this talk the most. This has been a bit of a roadshow that I've taken to various little groups around the uni, so apologies, Fran, for hearing it all over again. I talk a little bit about what is AI, and I think we've all got an idea of that, but let's just make sure we're on even ground here for today's talk. It is a very nebulous term, right? It's been used or misused, in my view, in many different ways over the years to refer to different algorithms. And we're often thinking about AI, we're thinking about tasks that were once the domain of the human but are now carried out by a machine. That's the definition that I tend to use in my work. Now, generative AI is a subset of AI that, as we know, is experiencing rapid growth at the moment, currently creating a lot of buzz, and really importantly, is being used a lot by our students. And there are lots of great reasons to use AI. So, generative AI can provide us with lots of new and exciting possibilities in my mind, and we're only really scratching the surface of that. I've been to a lot of talks about generative AI, and this is also true of a lot of my work, and a lot of the time people are saying, hey, I got generative AI to write my quiz questions. And that's kind of as far as we've got, right? People are still figuring out more interesting ways to use it. And many of you are probably sitting here thinking, well, I've come up with something, and I'd love to hear about that. But over the last 10 years, we've really been doing a lot of exciting and interesting stuff with different forms of generative AI that predate kind of where we are now. Things like Alison Parrish's articulations. Alison Parrish is a fellow game dev lecturer who has created poetry with generative AI for years and years and years. And then we have people like Kate Compton, who's written the Opulent Artificial Intelligence Manifesto, which is a very short and very fascinating read about why we need to rethink our relationship with AI. And so there's been a lot going on in that space, but for years and years, it was really limited to people that were programmers, people that were, deeply rooted in these communities. What we have with generative AI is the potential to democratize those opportunities. And I use the word potential very deliberately there. Because we also have a lot of responsibilities. And that's what I want to talk a lot about today. So there's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of different ethical and sustainability concerns that come along with our use of generative AI. And we really need to think about this because as educators, it's our responsibility. But I think as STEM educators, it's our obligation, right? This is kind of our home turf, right? So this is something we really need to be careful about. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what I've seen recently, and I probably am guilty of myself, but I've seen a lot from my colleagues as well, here and abroad, and that's many of us have different views on generative AI. But I find that some of us have taken very open-minded views to generative AI. And I've often thought that that kind of approach of, I let my students use generative AI to do whatever. They want to write their essay with ChatGPT, that's okie dokie by me, because I'm a cool professor, and I embrace change. And it just reminds me of this scene from Mean Girls, which is showing my age a little bit there. But we're educators, we need to do better than that, frankly, right? We need to do better than that. We're not CEO startups that are fascinated by everything and invested everything in NFTs and AI. We're educators and we're academics. We need to do better than that. So these kind of approaches are what I call as being dismissively positive, because they open the floodgates in ways that isn't really useful for our students and isn't teaching our students how to use these tools in interesting ways. And I've heard students say to me, yeah, my professor just said I can do whatever I want, right, with generative AI. I can just write my essay with it, but I don't know how to use the tool. I have many students that don't want to use these tools as well. I teach in game development, so you have students that love generative AI and students that are like, but no, I want to use my degree to dismantle capitalism, so why would I use generative AI? Letting students kind of just do what they want is irresponsible and dangerous. People say to me, it's not that bad though, right? There aren't that many concerns that we need to have. And yes, there are. And I'm sure a lot of us are aware of these by now. Now, before I get to the next slide, I'm going to go very doom and gloom for a little bit. And I want to be very clear to everyone, I am not anti-generative AI. I find that if I'm in a room with everyone saying, yes, this is amazing. Hey, look, I wrote my syllabus with generative AI. How cool am I? I'm the doom and gloom doomsayer that holds up a sign that says the end is nigh. And then if I'm in a room with people that say, I will never use generative AI, I hate it, I'm the person saying, hey, write your syllabus with generative AI, right? I'm somewhere in between, and I think that's where a lot of us should be. But I am going to go a little bit doom and gloom here. I'm going to throw out a quick trigger warning that I am going to be talking about abuse, sexual abuse, very briefly, and misogyny. So that's just my trigger warning. If anyone needs to pop out of the room for a couple minutes, put headphones on, whatever, save yourself a little bit of grief. I'll hang for a few moments. And let's roll, okay. So these are the UN SDGs. This is something that here at Macquarie we integrate into our curriculum, right? We're trying to target all of our units to somehow approach these and look at these in some way. And it's been a very exciting time doing that. Last year or so that I've been working on doing that with my units, and I'm sure some of you from other institutions have different relationships with these. But I wanted to look into these and think about, as we were approaching these and having to integrate these into our units, at the same time, we were also having to think about, well, how do we incorporate generative AI? And I thought, do these two things contradict each other in any way? So I decided to highlight the UN SDGs that integration of generative AI, in my view, violates or can potentially violate, right? And that's all the ones that aren't gray. So a lot of them, right? We have a lot of situations, and depending on your field, you might see some others. I'm actually now thinking I should have had 16 highlighted, but never mind. You might see other ones here, right? Where the use of generative AI within your field is kind of violating these UN SDGs. And so I'm going to talk through these a little bit, and I'm going to kind of give a negative, and then I'm going to give that positive. Because like I say, we need to find some sort of space in the middle, right? I'm not going to give solutions in this little talk. Okay, number one, I don't have them. Number two, I don't have time. And number three, that's kind of where we're going to chat about things in the workshop, hopefully, right? So this is more provocations, more getting us thinking and aligning ourselves positively and negatively with these things. So quality education is kind of the first one here. Now, as we probably know, AI tools like ChatGPT, they're known to hallucinate. This is a little bit of a controversial term, hallucination, actually within, the more critical AI space, because it kind of suggests that the AI is, just kind of being a bit silly and hallucinating. It's okay. Another way to put this is that generative AI tools fit the academic definition of bullshit in terms of their output, right? This is my favorite piece of writing on generative AI at the moment, Hicks et al. This is where they're talking about the fact that, okay, it's very confident, but just like the student that gets up and gives the book report with blank palm cards and hasn't read the book, it's bullshitting, right? It's just making shit up kind of convincingly. that might get it right every now and then. So we know they shouldn't be writing our lectures for us, right? That's for sure. But we can think about these kind of errors in what generative AI might say, and there are some arguments here for using it. Imagine you're a student, you're up at 4 a.m, you've got an assignment due soon, and you can't find the due date. It doesn't seem to be posted on the CMS, sorry, not the CMS, the iLearn or Moodle, Blackboard, whatever your learning platform is, Brightspace, for those of you who have to use Brightspace, my condolences. And it's not in the syllabus, it's not in the unit guide, you know, the information isn't there. If you have a chatbot where you can ask for some advice about how late submissions are handled at 4 a.m, rather than emailing your lecturer who doesn't respond or does respond and is very cranky about responding, that's me. You've got something you can talk to that might say, look, I might be wrong, but you know, here's the best information I can pull from the system using my model. That might at least mean the student gets a good night's sleep, right? It doesn't solve all the problems, and yeah, it might not have been exactly right, but the student is accepting that, and this way they're at least able to, you know, have a bit more well-being in their life. So AI research is something we've long talked about in this space, is this idea of embedded prejudice, right? Which is this idea around how in AI models, they can really promulgate the biases from within their training data. This has been spoken about for a long time. It's a real problem with AI. And using AI to kind of generate images or case studies might contribute to these prejudices. If I'm using something like Grok or Midjourney to create an image of scientists all sitting around and solving a problem, and it spits out a picture of 4 white dudes, and then I chuck that in my lecture, I'm not really helping, you know, address representation in my classroom, right? However, it can also help solve some problems of equality and inequities. Generative AI can be really useful for EALD students if they're trying to improve their written expression. I know EALD isn't a universal term, so for those outside of Australia, English is an additional language or dialect is what I mean by that. So it can allow students to, you know, tidy up their language in some way using something like ChatGPT or Claude AI, something like that, to tidy up their written expression, which can be really handy, especially if we're not directly marking that written expression and instead just want to see their arguments. It can also, you know, provide marginalized communities with resources. There's been some work there by Rain 2023 where they've talked about the idea of using generative AI to get chatbots into marginalized communities so they can ask about things like, you know, resources, when is the power coming back on, where can I get clean water at the moment, those kinds of things, right? Allowing that interface. I also want to talk a little bit about well-being and exploitation, and this is the big one for me. So image generation tools like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, these data sets have been removed, but you know, it's still potentially lurking there in the data. These were trained on data sets containing child exploitation material, right? That's a big one to me. Now, it's unlikely if you're going on and using this tool to create an image of a puppy wearing a lab coat, something like that. It's unlikely these images are going to in any way influence our content, but the fact remains this content has existed in these data sets, and that's something you need to reckon with if you're using these tools, right? Just in the same way we need to reckon with all of our pipelines of how we consume products, right? That's something we really need to reckon with. So we need to be aware of the tools we use here. I don't really have a positive one here, but we need to be aware of the tools we use and make these informed decisions. And as regulation of generative AI increases, as more people are talking about it, as us as educators are looking at how we use it and communicating with our students, creating research about this, we can help promote the use of responsible generative AI. Right? So the next one I want to talk a little bit about is copyright consent and industry. So copyright, this one kind of makes me laugh a little bit, not what's going on here, but the fact that OpenAI got really upset with DeepSeek because DeepSeek is using content generated by ChatGPT in its training data, and OpenAI said, hey, you're stealing our stuff, man. The same company who has said, we have to steal content to make our tool work. So I just thought that was kind of funny. The moral of that story is that these companies are not taking it very seriously, so we need to. they're often trained, a lot of generative AI models, they're often trained on unregulated copyrighted material without artist consent. We can talk about, there's this whole argument about will people lose jobs from that? That's an important argument. But I think a more important argument for us as academics who are, very interested in attribution, very interested in correct citation, can we kind of sanction copyright infringement, whether it's getting rid of jobs or not? Is it okay for us to engage in that? Now, if we manage to solve these problems, right, again, through responsible use of generative AI and advocating for responsible tools, maybe these could really improve our workflow, allow us to create quick mock-ups, allow us to create an image that we need to put in our slides. I will admit, I don't really use generative AI, but a few nights ago I had a moment of weakness and I asked Grok to create an image of Elsa from Frozen eating her rice and beans to show to my daughter, right? I just had to, right? But now every night she's like, can I have a picture of Spider-Man eating noodles? I'm like, no, Spider-Man is going to bed. Anyway. So on another note about that kind of stuff, and this is, I think, this is kind of my, I am legally obligated disclaimer as a Macquarie Uni staff member, but feeding your unit materials, feeding student data, right? So student grades and stuff like that might have names and emails attached, all that kind of stuff. Other sensitive information into generative AI is not a great idea, right? Feeding that into that data set. Because then this can become part of the AI's training data in many cases, and then others can actually retrieve that data. And people have done interesting experiments of that, where they've been retrieving kind of confessions people have made to generative AI, treating it as like a psychologist. So we don't want our students doing this, I don't want them to feed sensitive information, and I talk to them a lot about data privacy. So we should be really careful about this generative AI use. And depending on your institution, you might have some pipelines set up to handle this. We've got kind of a closed co-pilot system here at Macquarie that we can use to avoid that kind of thing. And I know UCID have got some great stuff in this space. Okay, environmental impact. So this is one that probably, I'm here at a STEM educators conference and I am a game development lecturer. So there's people in this room that know a lot more about this and a lot of other stuff than me. So, but from what I have read, the production and use of generative AI models, these have massive environmental impacts, right? There's a lot written about this around carbon emissions, metal scarcity, all the rest. I don't need to go into that detail. So that's a negative. But we can also use generative AI to help with this analysis, help detecting water use patterns, waste management, stuff like that. And again, there's a journal article from RAIN 2023 about this kind of stuff. So there's ways we can use generative AI to help with these problems, but we need to first get over the fact, or when I say get over as in solve, the fact that there are these environmental impacts themselves. But I think the most important takeaway here is that we don't want to subscribe to technological determinism. Years and years ago, when I was first in this space, people said, we will not have websites by 2020, we will have chatbots, right? And that was in the day of kind of earlier Siri and stuff like that. None of this is written in stone, right? We as humans create technology and use technology. So we shouldn't subscribe to this idea that generative AI is going to take over and control everything. We need to think about how we are using it. These problems, and the solutions, they come from a long history of AI ethicists, artists, and creators, and we need to be part of that conversation and work as part of it. We can help shape the future of AI through critical, responsible use and having robust ethical practices. So yeah, I might sound gloomy, but we do need to have these conversations, right, about the good and about the bad, because that's how we're going to solve these problems together. I'm going to talk more about my findings, how I've used this in my units in the workshops later today, where I've used this in my game development units. My students don't like writing essays, so that's where I'll mainly focus things. And I'd love to hear about how you're using it, or maybe where this has kind of given you some ideas for how to use it. Talk about that there. Here are my references, because I don't make shit up. Thank you so much.